The clock on the dashboard showed 9:47 p.m. as Judge Robert Washington turned his modest silver sedan onto Oakwood Avenue. The street was lined with expensive houses, their manicured lawns glowing under warm streetlights. Robert had just finished speaking at a community meeting about police reform at the local civic center. The meeting had gone well, with residents asking thoughtful questions about how to improve relationships between law enforcement and the community. At 52 years old, Robert had spent the last 15 years as a federal arbitrator, handling cases that often involved police misconduct and civil rights violations. Tonight's meeting was personal for him. He had grown up in this city, watching his neighborhood change over the decades. He remembered when his family couldn't afford to live in areas like Oakwood Avenue. Now, as a respected federal judge, he was invited to speak in these same neighborhoods about making the justice system fairer for everyone. Robert adjusted his rearview mirror and noticed a police car about 3 blocks behind him. The cruiser had been following the same route for the past few minutes. He thought nothing of it at first. Police officers patrolled these neighborhoods regularly, especially at night. Robert continued driving at exactly the speed limit, his hands positioned properly on the steering wheel, just as his father had taught him decades ago. 3 blocks behind, Officer Derek Mitchell was running the license plate through his system. The car looked out of place to him. It wasn't the expensive luxury vehicle he usually saw in this neighborhood. The sedan was clean but older, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Mitchell squinted through his windshield, trying to get a better look at the driver. When they passed under a streetlight, he could see the silhouette of a black man wearing what looked like a suit jacket. Mitchell had been a police officer for 15 years. His personnel file contained 7 complaints about excessive force and inappropriate conduct, though none had resulted in serious consequences. He had a reputation among his colleagues for being tough on crime, which really meant he was quick to assume the worst about people, especially in neighborhoods like this one. What's someone like that doing driving around here this late? Mitchell muttered to himself. He had seen it before, or at least he thought he had. Someone who didn't belong in the neighborhood, probably looking for trouble. Maybe checking out houses to rob later. Maybe dealing drugs to rich kids whose parents didn't pay enough attention. Robert glanced at his phone, which was mounted on his dashboard. His wife had texted him 20 minutes ago asking when he'd be home. He voice texted back that he was about 10 minutes away. The community meeting had run longer than expected, but it was worth it. The residents seemed genuinely interested in working with law enforcement to build trust. Some had shared stories about positive interactions with police officers, while others talked about times when they felt unfairly treated. As Robert approached the intersection of Oakwood and Pine Street, he checked his mirrors before changing lanes. The move was perfectly legal, but he had signaled maybe 90 feet before the lane change instead of the required 100 feet. It was the kind of minor technical violation that most officers would ignore, especially since no other cars were around and no safety issues were created. But Mitchell saw his opportunity. "Got you," he said, reaching for his radio. He called in the traffic stop, giving his location and the license plate number. Then he hit his emergency lights, filling the quiet street with flashing red and blue. Robert's heart sank when he saw the lights behind him. He had been pulled over before, though not in recent years. He knew the drill. Stay calm, keep your hands visible, be respectful, and hope for the best. He pulled over to the curb, turned off his engine, and rolled down his window. Then he placed both hands on the steering wheel where the officer could see them. Mitchell took his time approaching the vehicle. He wanted the driver to sweat a little, to wonder what was coming next. He had learned this technique early in his career from an older officer who told him that making people nervous gave him more control over the situation. Mitchell walked slowly toward the driver's side, his hand resting on his service weapon. Robert watched in his side mirror as the officer approached. The man looked to be in his early 40s with short brown hair and a stocky build. His uniform was neat, but there was something about his posture that made Robert uneasy. The officer wasn't just doing his job. He was making a show of his authority. "Good evening, officer," Robert said politely when Mitchell reached his window. "May I ask why you pulled me over?" Mitchell shined his flashlight directly into Robert's face, causing him to squint. "License and registration," Mitchell said without answering the question. His tone was cold and commanding, not the professional courtesy that Robert expected from a routine traffic stop. Robert reached slowly for his wallet, announcing his movements. "I'm reaching for my wallet in my jacket pocket," he said. "My registration is in the glove compartment. Keep your hands where I can see them," Mitchell snapped, though Robert was clearly being careful to move slowly and announce everything he was doing. As Robert handed over his documents, Mitchell continued shining the flashlight in his face. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Mitchell asked. The question caught Robert off guard. It wasn't standard procedure to ask someone why they were driving on a public street. "I was attending a community meeting at the Civic Center," Robert answered honestly. "I'm heading home. Now." Mitchell examined the license, holding it close to his flashlight. The address showed that Robert lived about 15 minutes away in a middle-class neighborhood. Mitchell had patrolled that area before. It was mostly working families, nothing like the wealthy enclave where they currently stood. "A meeting about what?" Mitchell pressed, his suspicion growing rather than decreasing. "Community policing and police reform," Robert answered. He was starting to realize that this traffic stop was about more than a minor signaling violation. Mitchell's expression hardened. In his mind, someone attending a meeting about police reform was probably anti-police. Combined with his assumptions about why a black man would be driving through this neighborhood, Mitchell was building a narrative in his head that had little to do with reality. "Step out of the vehicle," Mitchell ordered, stepping back from the car. Robert felt his stomach tighten. "Officer, may I ask what this is about? I believe I was pulled over for a minor traffic violation." "Step out of the vehicle now," Mitchell repeated, his hand moving closer to his weapon. Robert knew he had no choice. Even though he was a federal judge who understood the law better than most police officers, he also knew that arguing on the street could escalate the situation dangerously. He opened his door slowly and stepped out, keeping his hands visible. The cool night air hit his face as he stood beside his car. In the distance, he could hear the normal sounds of the neighborhood. A dog barking, someone's television through an open window, the hum of air conditioning units. Everything seemed so normal, yet here he was, being treated like a criminal for driving while black in an upscale neighborhood. Neither man knew it yet, but this encounter would change both of their lives forever. Robert stood beside his car with his hands clearly visible, the flashing police lights casting eerie shadows across his face. Officer Mitchell circled around to face him, maintaining what he considered a tactical advantage. The street was quiet except for the low hum of the police cruiser's engine and the distant sound of late-night television from nearby houses. "Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car," Mitchell commanded, his voice carrying an edge that went beyond standard police procedure. Robert complied slowly, placing his palms flat against the cool metal of his sedan's roof. "Officer, I'd like to understand what this is about. I was pulled over for what seemed like a minor traffic violation." Mitchell began patting down Robert's jacket and pants, searching for weapons. "I'll ask the questions here," he said. "You were signaling improperly back there. That's a moving violation." "I understand," Robert replied calmly. "I thought I signaled appropriately, but if I made an error, I apologize." The pat-down revealed nothing more threatening than Robert's wallet, keys, and cell phone. But Mitchell wasn't satisfied. Something about this whole situation bothered him. In his experience, people who lived in neighborhoods like this one didn't drive 8-year-old sedans. They drove BMWs, Mercedes, or at least newer SUVs. "This your car?" Mitchell asked, stepping back but keeping his hand near his weapon. "Yes, sir, it is." "You got the title with you?" Robert turned around slowly, confused by the question. "The title? No, sir. I have my registration, which I believe is all that's required during a traffic stop." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "How do I know you didn't steal this car?" The question hit Robert like a physical blow. In all his years as a federal judge, hearing cases involving police misconduct, he thought he understood how these situations developed. But experiencing it firsthand was different. The assumption of criminality tie based on nothing more than his race, and his presence in this neighborhood was both infuriating and heartbreaking. "Officer, I can assure you this is my vehicle," Robert said, working hard to keep his voice steady. "My registration shows that I'm the legal owner." "Registration can be faked," Mitchell shot back. "I've seen it plenty of times. Someone like you driving around a neighborhood like this at night? That's suspicious behavior." "Someone like me?" Robert asked, though he already knew what Mitchell meant. Mitchell realized he might have gone too far with that comment. "Yeah, someone who doesn't live around here, driving an old car, being evasive about why you're here." "I wasn't being evasive, officer. I told you I was at a community meeting about police reform. I'm a federal judge, and I was invited to speak to residents about improving police-community relations." Mitchell actually laughed at this claim. "A federal judge?" "Right. And I'm the chief of police." He looked Robert up and down dismissively. "You don't look like any judge I've ever seen." The comment stung more than Robert expected. He had worked his entire adult life to reach his position on the federal bench. He had graduated from law school with honors, served as a prosecutor, worked in private practice, and been appointed to the federal judiciary after a rigorous vetting process. But to this officer, he didn't look like a judge. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I'd appreciate being treated with basic respect," Robert said. "I'm happy to provide any documentation you need to verify my identity." "Basic respect?" Mitchell's voice rose slightly. "I'm the one with the badge here. I'm the one keeping this neighborhood safe from people who don't belong." Robert felt his patience wearing thin, but he knew that showing anger could escalate the situation dangerously. He had seen too many cases where traffic stops went wrong because emotions got heated. "Officer, I have identification that will verify everything I've told you." "Yeah? What kind of identification?" "I have my federal courthouse ID badge in my wallet, along with my bar association card and my judicial credentials." Mitchell considered this for a moment. He had never actually seen a federal judge's ID before. "Turn around and put your hands back on the car. I'm going to search your wallet myself." Robert wanted to object. The search was going well beyond what was justified for a simple traffic violation. But he also knew that refusing could give Mitchell an excuse to escalate further. "Officer, I'd prefer to hand you my wallet myself. That way you can see I'm being cooperative." "I said turn around," Mitchell snapped. "I'll get the wallet myself." Robert complied, feeling increasingly helpless. Mitchell reached into Robert's jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open and immediately saw several credit cards, some cash, and a driver's license. But tucked behind the license was a plastic ID card with an official-looking seal. Mitchell pulled out the card and examined it under his flashlight. It read, "Federal Courthouse, Eastern District," with Robert's photo and the title, "Federal Arbitrator." The card looked official, with security features that would be difficult to fake. "Where did you get this?" Mitchell asked, though his tone had lost some of its aggressive edge. "It was issued to me by the federal courthouse where I work," Robert answered. "I've been a federal arbitrator for 15 years. Mitchell studied the card more carefully. It had Robert's photo, an official seal, and even a magnetic strip on the back. It looked legitimate, but Mitchell had never seen anything like it before. For all he knew, these cards could be easily faked. "This could be fake," Mitchell said, though he sounded less certain than before. "Officer, I understand your caution, but that's an official federal ID. You can verify it by calling the courthouse, or you can run my name through your system. I'm sure there's a record of my judicial appointment." Mitchell was starting to feel uncomfortable. The ID looked real, and the man's story was becoming more consistent. But backing down now would be admitting that he had misjudged the situation from the beginning. His pride wouldn't let him do that easily. "Yeah, well, even if you are some kind of judge, that doesn't give you the right to drive around this neighborhood acting suspicious." "Acting suspicious how?" Robert asked. "I was driving home from a community meeting. I wasn't speeding, I wasn't driving erratically, and I wasn't doing anything illegal." "You were signaling improperly," Mitchell reminded him. "Yes, and if that's a violation, I accept responsibility for it. But that doesn't justify treating me like a criminal or questioning my right to drive on a public street." Mitchell was running out of justifications for his behavior, but he wasn't ready to admit his mistake. Look, this is a high-crime area. We get a lot of break-ins, drug dealing, that sort of thing. I'm just doing my job. Robert almost laughed at the description of Oakwood Avenue as a high-crime area. It was one of the safest neighborhoods in the city with virtually no violent crime and very little property crime. But he understood what Mitchell really meant. It was an area where black people weren't expected to be driving around at night. "Officer, I understand you have a job to do," Robert said, "but I also have rights regardless of what neighborhood I'm driving through. I've been cooperative throughout this entire encounter, and I've provided you with identification that should resolve any questions about who I am." Mitchell looked at the federal ID again. Something about the whole situation was starting to feel wrong. If this man really was a federal judge, Mitchell could be in serious trouble for how he had handled the stop. But if he wasn't, then Mitchell was dealing with someone who had gone to great lengths to create fake credentials. "I'm going to need to verify this information," Mitchell said finally. "That's fine," Robert replied. "I encourage you to verify it." Mitchell walked back to his patrol car, taking Robert's wallet with him. As he sat in the driver's seat, he could see Robert standing beside his sedan, still maintaining the respectful posture that had characterized his behavior throughout the encounter. Mitchell began to have his first serious doubts about his assumptions. He picked up his radio and prepared to call in Robert's information. But something made him hesitate. If Robert really was a federal judge, this traffic stop was about to become a career-ending mistake. Mitchell sat in his patrol car staring at the federal ID card under the dome light. The card felt substantial in his hands, not like the flimsy fake IDs he had encountered before. The photo clearly showed Robert's face, and the official seals looked authentic. But Mitchell had built his entire interaction on the assumption that Robert didn't belong in this neighborhood, and admitting error now felt impossible. He picked up his radio and called dispatch. "Unit 247 to dispatch. I need you to run a name for me." "Go ahead, 247, came the crackling response. "Robert Washington, date of birth." Mitchell read the information from the driver's license. "I need you to check for any warrants and also see if this name comes up in any official capacity." "Copy that, 247, stand by." While waiting for the response, Mitchell decided to search Robert's wallet more thoroughly. Behind the federal ID, he found a business card that read, "Robert Washington, Federal Arbitrator, Eastern District Court." The card had an official courthouse address and phone number. Mitchell pulled out his personal cell phone and did a quick internet search for Federal Arbitrator Robert Washington. The search results made his stomach drop. The first hit was a news article from 3 months ago. Federal Arbitrator Robert Washington to lead police reform initiative. The article included Robert's photo and described his appointment to a special committee reviewing police conduct cases. Mitchell scrolled through more results, finding several articles about Robert's work on civil rights cases and police accountability measures. One article from just 2 weeks ago made Mitchell's hands shake slightly. The headline read, "Judge, Washington. Every police officer must be held to constitutional standards." The article quoted Robert extensively about the need for better training and accountability in law enforcement. Mitchell's radio crackled to life. "Unit 247, negative on warrants for Robert Washington. However, we show him as a federal employee with the courthouse. He's listed as a federal arbitrator and appears to be involved in some kind of police oversight committee." Mitchell's throat went dry. "Can you repeat that, dispatch?" "Robert Washington is a federal arbitrator with the Eastern District Court. He's assigned to the Police Accountability Review Board. No warrants, no criminal history, clean record." "Copy," Mitchell managed to say, his voice barely audible. Mitchell looked through the windshield at Robert, who remained standing patiently beside his car. The man hadn't moved, hadn't become agitated, hadn't done anything but cooperate completely. Mitchell realized that everything he had assumed about this encounter was not just wrong, but catastrophically wrong. But Mitchell's problems were getting worse by the minute. As he continued searching through Robert's wallet, he found additional credentials that confirmed his worst fears. There was a membership card for the American Bar Association, a platinum credit card, and tucked behind everything else, a small card that read Keynote Speaker, Community Policing Reform Conference tonight. Mitchell's hands began to tremble as he realized the full scope of his mistake. Robert hadn't just been driving through the neighborhood randomly. He had been invited to speak at a conference about police reform. And Mitchell had just provided him with a perfect example of exactly the kind of police misconduct that the conference was designed to address. Even worse, Mitchell found a small digital recorder in Robert's jacket pocket during his search. The device had been running the entire time, recording every word of their interaction. Every inappropriate question, every assumption based on race, every violation of proper police procedure had been captured on audio. Mitchell sat in his car for several more minutes trying to figure out how to handle the situation. He could return Robert's wallet, apologize for the misunderstanding, and hope that nothing came of it. But he knew that hope was unrealistic. Robert was exactly the kind of person who would file a formal complaint, and he had the recording to back up every detail of his story. Alternatively, Mitchell could try to find some way to justify his actions. Maybe claim that Robert had been acting suspiciously, or that he had seemed nervous during the initial contact. But the recording would disprove any false claims Mitchell might make. Finally, Mitchell got out of his patrol car and walked back toward Robert. Each step felt heavier than the last. Robert watched him approach with the same calm, respectful demeanor he had maintained throughout the encounter. "Sir, I've verified your identification," Mitchell said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Everything appears to be in order." "Thank you, officer," Robert replied. "May I have my wallet back?" Mitchell handed over the wallet, avoiding eye contact. "Yes, sir. You're free to go." But Robert didn't immediately get back in his car. "Officer, before I leave, I'd like to discuss what just happened here." Mitchell's heart began racing. "Sir, I was just doing my job. Routine traffic stop for a signaling violation. Was it routine to ask me what I was doing in this neighborhood?" Robert asked calmly. "Was it routine to suggest that I had stolen my car? Was it routine to tell me that I don't look like a judge?" Mitchell realized that Robert had been paying careful attention to everything that had been said. There would be no way to deny or minimize what had happened. "Sir, I was just being thorough." "Thorough?" Robert's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Officer, I've spent 15 years as a federal arbitrator. I've reviewed hundreds of cases involving police misconduct. What happened here tonight wasn't thoroughness. It was racial profiling, pure and simple." Mitchell wanted to argue, but he knew Robert was right. Everything he had done had been based on assumptions about Robert's race and his presence in an upscale neighborhood. There was no legitimate law enforcement justification for any of it. "I want you to know that I recorded our entire interaction," Robert continued. "I have evidence of everything that was said and done. The question now is what I'm going to do with that evidence." Mitchell felt sick to his stomach. His 15-year career was about to end because of one traffic stop that he had handled completely wrong. "Sir, I apologize if I came across as unprofessional." "Unprofessional?" Robert shook his head. "Officer, this wasn't about professionalism. This was about constitutional rights. You pulled me over for a minor traffic violation and then subjected me to an illegal search and interrogation based on nothing but racial bias." Mitchell knew he was trapped. Any response he made would either be an admission of guilt or an obvious lie that the recording would contradict. He stood there silently, watching his career crumble in real time. "I want your name and badge number," Robert said, pulling out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "Mitchell," the officer replied quietly. "Derek Mitchell, badge number 1847. Robert wrote down the information carefully. "Officer Mitchell, I'm going to be filing a formal complaint about this incident. You'll be hearing from Internal Affairs within the next few days." Mitchell nodded, knowing there was nothing he could say that would change Robert's mind. And honestly, he was beginning to realize that Robert was absolutely right to file a complaint. Mitchell had violated every principle of fair and constitutional policing. "One more thing," Robert said as he prepared to get back in his car. The community meeting I attended tonight was about building trust between police and the community. The residents asked me what they could do to improve relationships with law enforcement. After tonight, I'm going to have to tell them that we still have a long way to go. As Robert drove away, Mitchell stood alone on the empty street, the flashing lights of his patrol car still painting the neighborhood in red and blue. He knew that his world was about to change forever, and that he had no one to blame but himself. Officer Mitchell stood alone under the streetlights, watching Robert's taillights disappear around the corner. The weight of what had just happened began to sink in fully. He had not only made a catastrophic professional error, but he had done it to someone who had the power and knowledge to ensure there would be serious consequences. Mitchell's radio crackled to life, startling him out of his thoughts. Unit 247, what's your status on that traffic stop? Mitchell picked up the radio with shaking hands. Unit 247, traffic stop concluded. Citation issued. The lie came automatically, but even as he said it, Mitchell knew it was pointless. There would be no hiding what had really happened. As Mitchell drove back toward the police station, his mind raced through the implications of the encounter. Robert Washington wasn't just any federal judge. According to the internet search Mitchell had done, Robert was specifically involved in police oversight and reform. He was exactly the wrong person to mistreat during a traffic stop, and Mitchell had managed to provide him with a textbook example of everything that was wrong with modern policing. The next morning, Mitchell reported for his shift, hoping that maybe Robert would decide not to file a complaint. Maybe he would chalk it up to a misunderstanding and move on with his life. Mitchell knew it was wishful thinking, but he couldn't help hoping that his 15-year career wouldn't end because of one terrible decision. His hopes were crushed before he even reached his patrol car. Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting for him in the parking lot, holding a manila folder. Rodriguez had been Mitchell's supervisor for 3 years, and Mitchell could tell from his expression that this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "Mitchell, we need to talk," Rodriguez said. "My office now." Mitchell followed Rodriguez into the building, his stomach churning with anxiety. Rodriguez's office was small and cluttered, with commendations and photos covering the walls. Rodriguez closed the door and gestured for Mitchell to sit down. "Derek, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a completely honest answer," Rodriguez began. "Did you pull over a federal judge named Robert Washington last night?" Mitchell's first instinct was to lie, to claim that it had been a routine traffic stop with no problems. But he knew that Robert's complaint would include details that would make any lie obvious. "Yes, sir. I pulled over Judge Washington for a signaling violation." "And how did that interaction go?" Mitchell hesitated. "There were some complications." Rodriguez opened the manila folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. "Derek, I've got Judge Washington's formal complaint right here. I've also got a recording of your entire interaction. Do you want to tell me your version of events, or should I just read what he's accused you of?" Mitchell felt his world collapsing. "Sir, I was just doing my job. The judge was driving through an upscale neighborhood in an older car, and I thought it looked suspicious." Rodriguez's expression hardened. "Suspicious how? Because a black man was driving through a nice neighborhood?" "No, sir, that's not." Mitchell started to protest, but the words died in his throat. That was exactly what had happened, and they both knew it. "Derek, I listened to the recording," Rodriguez said. "I heard you ask him what he was doing in that neighborhood. I heard you suggest that he might have stolen his car. I heard you tell him that he doesn't look like a judge. Do you understand how serious this is?" Mitchell nodded miserably. "Yes. Sir?" "This isn't just about a complaint from a citizen," Rodriguez continued. "Judge Washington sits on the Police Accountability Review Board. He's the person who reviews cases of police misconduct for the federal court system. You just gave him a first-hand example of exactly the kind of behavior his committee is trying to eliminate." The irony wasn't lost on Mitchell. Of all the people he could have chosen to harass, he had picked the one person whose job it was to hold police officers accountable for exactly this kind of behavior. "What happens now?" Mitchell asked. "Well, for starters, you're suspended pending a full internal affairs investigation," Rodriguez said. "But that's just the beginning. Judge Washington has also indicated that he's considering filing federal civil rights charges. Mitchell's face went white. Federal charges? Derek, you violated his constitutional rights under color of law. That's a federal crime. You could be looking at criminal prosecution, not just losing your job. The reality of the situation hit Mitchell like a physical blow. He had always thought of himself as one of the good guys, someone who was protecting the community from criminals. But now he was the one facing criminal charges for his own misconduct. Sir, is there anything I can do? Can I apologize to Judge Washington? Can I try to make this right? Rodriguez shook his head. Derek, Judge Washington is not some civilian who doesn't understand how the system works. He's a federal judge who has seen every trick and excuse that bad cops use to justify their behavior. He knows exactly what you did, why you did it, and what the consequences should be. Mitchell sat in silence for several minutes trying to process the magnitude of his situation. His career was over, that much was certain, but the possibility of criminal charges was terrifying. He had seen what happened to police officers in federal prison, and it wasn't pleasant. There's something else you need to know, Rodriguez said. This incident is already getting media attention. Media attention? Judge Washington is a respected figure in the legal community. When word gets out that he was racially profiled during a traffic stop, it's going to be big news. The department is already getting calls from reporters wanting to comment on the story. Mitchell put his head in his hands. Not only was his career over, but his public humiliation would be complete. His family, his friends, everyone he knew would see him portrayed as the racist cop who violated a federal judge's rights. Derek, I need you to understand something, Rodriguez said, his voice becoming more serious. This isn't just about you anymore. This incident is going to reflect on the entire department. Every officer who works here is going to have to answer questions about whether we have a culture of racial bias. Mitchell realized that his actions had consequences far beyond his own career. His colleagues, who had nothing to do with his poor decisions, would now have to deal with increased scrutiny and public distrust because of what he had done. The chief wants to see you this afternoon, Rodriguez continued. He's going to want to hear your side of the story, but I'll be honest with you, Derek. With the recording and Judge Washington's formal complaint, there's not much you can say. That's going to help your situation. Mitchell nodded, knowing that Rodriguez was right. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and there was no way to spin his actions in a positive light. Can I ask you something, Derek? Rodriguez said. Why did you do it? You've been a cop for 15 years. You know better than to treat someone like that without probable cause. Mitchell thought about the question for a long time before answering. I don't know, sir. I saw a black man driving through that neighborhood, and I just assumed. I assumed he didn't belong there. I was wrong. Yes, you were wrong, Rodriguez agreed. And now everyone is going to pay the price for your assumptions. As Mitchell left Rodriguez's office, he realized that his life had been permanently changed by 15 minutes of poor judgment. All of his training, all of his experience, all of his years of service meant nothing now. He would be remembered as the racist cop who was so blinded by his own prejudices that he couldn't recognize a federal judge when he saw one. The worst part was that Mitchell was beginning to understand that Robert Washington had been completely right to file his complaint. Mitchell had violated his oath as a police officer and his duty to protect and serve all citizens equally. He deserved whatever consequences were coming his way. 3 weeks after the traffic stop, the story broke nationally. The headline read, "Federal judge records his own racial profiling during traffic stop." Within hours, the audio recording was being played on news stations across the country. Mitchell's voice, demanding to know what Robert was doing in that neighborhood and claiming he didn't look like a judge, became a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. Robert Washington sat in his federal courthouse office, watching the hour coverage on his computer screen. He had not wanted the incident to become a media circus, but he knew that public attention was sometimes necessary to create meaningful change. The recording had been released as part of his formal complaint, and news organizations had immediately recognized its significance. The phone on Robert's desk rang constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Civil rights organizations wanted to discuss the case, and fellow judges called to express their support. But Robert was most interested in the calls from ordinary citizens who shared their own stories of police misconduct. "I never reported it because I didn't think anyone would believe me," one caller told him. "But hearing your recording, I realized that what happened to me was just as wrong as what happened to you." Robert understood the caller's perspective. Most victims of police misconduct didn't have federal credentials or the legal knowledge to navigate the complaint process. They suffered in silence, assuming that challenging police officers was hopeless. Robert's case was different because he had the tools and platform to fight back effectively. Meanwhile, Officer Derek Mitchell was learning firsthand what it meant to be on the wrong side of a federal investigation. FBI agents had interviewed him twice, and federal prosecutors were reviewing his case for possible civil rights violations. The internal affairs investigation had concluded quickly, with Mitchell's termination being announced just 1 week after the incident. Mitchell's police union had initially promised to fight his firing, but after hearing the audio recording, they quietly withdrew their support. Even his most loyal colleagues couldn't defend what he had done. The recording was simply too damning, too clear in its evidence of racial bias and constitutional violations. The impact on Mitchell's personal life was devastating. His wife, who had supported him throughout his police career, was horrified by what she heard on the recording. She had never seen this side of her husband, and she struggled to reconcile the man she loved with the officer whose voice was now synonymous with police racism. "Derek, how could you talk to someone like that?" she asked him one evening as they watched the news coverage together. "That's not the man I married." Mitchell had no good answer. He was beginning to realize that maybe he had always harbored these biases, but had never been forced to confront them directly. The encounter with Robert Washington had revealed something ugly about himself that he had managed to hide, even from his own family. Their teenage daughter was facing harassment at school. Her classmates had figured out that her father was the racist cop from the viral recording. She came home in tears, asking why her dad had said those things to the judge. "Dad, my friends are asking me if you hate black people," she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know what to tell them. Mitchell realized that his actions had not only destroyed his own life, but had also hurt the people he loved most. His family was paying the price for his prejudices and poor judgment. 6 weeks after the traffic stop, federal prosecutors announced that they were charging Mitchell with violating Robert Washington's civil rights under color of law. The charges carried a potential sentence of up to 10 years in federal prison. Mitchell's attorney advised him to consider a plea agreement, but even a plea deal would likely result in several years behind bars. The charges sent shockwaves through the police department. Officers who had never thought much about racial bias in their own work began to question their assumptions and practices. The department implemented new training programs focused on constitutional policing and unconscious bias, using Mitchell's case as an example of how quickly a career could be destroyed by discriminatory behavior. Robert Washington used the attention surrounding the case to advocate for broader police reforms. He testified before Congress about the need for better training and accountability measures. He spoke at police academies, law schools, and community meetings about the importance of treating all citizens with dignity and respect. Officer Mitchell's actions weren't just wrong because he happened to target a federal judge, Robert told a conference of police chiefs. They were wrong because every citizen, regardless of their job or social status, deserves to be treated fairly by law enforcement. Robert's message resonated with many police officers who were genuinely committed to serving their communities ethically. They recognized that officers like Mitchell made their jobs harder by eroding public trust and creating negative stereotypes about law enforcement. The case also inspired changes in police training curricula across the country. The audio recording became a teaching tool, helping officers understand how unconscious bias could lead to constitutional violations and career-ending mistakes. Police academies began using the case study to illustrate the importance of treating every interaction with professionalism and respect. Meanwhile, Mitchell's legal troubles continued to mount. In addition to the federal charges, he faced a civil lawsuit from Robert Washington seeking damages for the violation of his constitutional rights. Mitchell's homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover the potential judgment, leaving him personally liable for potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. Mitchell's attorney tried to negotiate a settlement, but Robert's legal team made it clear that their client was more interested in setting a precedent than in collecting money. They wanted a court judgment that would make it clear that this kind of behavior was unacceptable and carried serious consequences. As the criminal case moved forward, Mitchell was forced to confront the reality of his situation. He had thrown away a 15-year career, devastated his family, and potentially faced years in federal prison, all because he couldn't see past his own racial prejudices. In a moment of clarity, Mitchell asked his attorney if he could write a letter of apology to Robert Washington. The attorney advised against it, explaining that any communication could be used against him in the criminal case, but Mitchell felt compelled to try to make some small amends for his actions. The letter, when it was finally written and delivered, was simple and direct. Judge Washington, I know that my apology cannot undo the harm I caused to you and your family. I also know that my actions reflected poorly on all the good police officers who do their jobs with integrity and respect for all citizens. I was wrong, and I accept full responsibility for my behavior. I hope that my case can serve as a lesson to other officers about the importance of treating every person with dignity, regardless of their race or background. Robert read the letter carefully, but he did not respond. The damage had been done, and words alone could not repair it. Mitchell would have to face the consequences of his actions, just as every citizen was expected to face the consequences of their behavior under the law. The case concluded 8 months later with Mitchell pleading guilty to federal civil rights violations. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $75,000 in damages to Robert Washington. The judge who sentenced Mitchell noted that his case had become a national symbol of the ongoing problems with racial bias in law enforcement. Officer Mitchell's actions remind us that the badge and uniform carry with them a sacred trust, the judge said during sentencing. When that trust is violated, especially in a manner that targets citizens based on their race, the consequences must be severe enough to deter others from similar conduct. Robert Washington attended the sentencing hearing, not out of vindictiveness, but because he wanted to see the justice system work as it was designed to work. He felt no satisfaction in seeing Mitchell sentenced to prison, but he recognized the importance of accountability in maintaining public trust in law enforcement. After the hearing, Robert spoke to reporters one final time about the case. This was never about revenge or punishment for its own sake, he said. This was about ensuring that every citizen can drive through any neighborhood without fear of being targeted because of their race. Officer Mitchell's conviction sends a clear message that this behavior will not be tolerated. The case became a landmark in police accountability, cited in legal journals, and used in training programs across the country. It served as a powerful reminder that in America, the law applies equally to everyone, including those who are sworn to enforce it. For Robert Washington, the case reinforced his commitment to justice and equality. He continued his work on police reform, using his experience to help bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities they serve. His calm professionalism during that traffic stop had not only protected his own rights, but had also created an opportunity for meaningful change in how police officers are trained and held accountable. The traffic stop that began with racial profiling had ended with a powerful affirmation that justice, while sometimes delayed, would ultimately prevail.